Heather spun around fast as a clattering thud echoed from behind. The sound of slow metallic grinding followed as she searched for what had fallen. Rolling between bustling feet and squeaky wheels alike was a large can of baked beans, which had quickly traveled an impressive distance from its original spot on the grocery store shelf. Unsure if it had been her fault, Heather hesitated for a moment. Her son, Colby, was hanging onto the lower bars of their cart, having recently outgrown the basket seat above. It was a crowded day, and the paranoia of leaving her child alone outweighed her desire to chase after a can of food. Fortunately, in that instant of reluctance, another shopper captured the runaway beans. "You may have dinged it up a bit, but we'll keep it a secret," the man said, returning the heavy can to its row.
"Oh, thanks. I don't know what pulled it down."
"Right, it's weird how that happens. I once knocked over a whole soda display." He spread his arms wide in an attempt to impress Colby, who was hiding behind his mother. "You're a lucky kid. My mom never would have bought me that many treats." Several packages of cookies had mysteriously appeared in their basket.
"Oh, someone is finally tall enough to sneak things into the cart."
Heather gave Colby a stern look. "Well, looks like veggies tonight. Have a good one." The man walked away as Heather grabbed the treats and pushed them onto a nearby end cap.
"I didn't do it,"
Colby mumbled as they continued down the aisle.
"Oh, I know you didn't. And I know you know Mommy can't afford all these snacks. As much as she'd love to fatten you up so she can eat you as a treat."
Colby laughed as Heather reached down and tickled his tummy. The two of them turned and continued their snaking path through the store. Shopping was stressful enough, but with the coming holiday it was particularly hectic. Not everyone was as cheery as that man had been. Most looked frazzled themselves, and when they weren't nearly colliding with each other, Heather shared an occasional despondent look with her cart-burdened kin.
"It wasn't me,"
Colby mumbled again.
"It was the candy lady." "Oh, the candy lady. Who is that?" "She gave us candy when you were talking to the man." "Oh, and what's the candy lady look like?" "She's up there."
Colby pointed to the top of a nearby shelf. Heather turned slowly, expecting to see an employee or perhaps a woman's face on some cereal. High above, a box of organic oatmeal wobbled gently, then stood still. It was admittedly unnerving.
"There's no candy lady. Someone was probably just restocking items on the other side." "There is a candy lady. She's always here and she smiles and she puts candy in the basket."
Heather was growing impatient. During previous trips to the store, there had been a recurring pattern of finding extra treats in her cart at checkout. This was just a silly child's excuse. She hoped it was a silly child's excuse.
"Come on, we're almost done."
With an echoing thud, something fell to the floor behind them. Heather feared what might be there if she dared to turn around and look. Colby smiled and waved in the direction he had pointed earlier. There was a feeling, like a heavy slug squirming across the back of her neck. She shuddered, then hesitantly spun about. The aisle was deserted. Slowly her eyes moved from the oatmeal box on the tiled floor up to the top shelf. It was empty. Colby giggled and shifted noisily. Snapping back, Heather couldn't find him. Panic set in just as a mound of snacks rained into the cart from above. There, far overhead, two small legs slid gently over the top of the aisle, disappearing among the products. One shoe tumbled to the cold floor below. Heather darted down the empty aisle and swiftly turned about to reach the opposite side of the wall, nearly colliding with the man from earlier as she did.
"Colby!"
she cried, looking desperately at the shoppers there. Colby was nowhere to be found. "Are you looking for your kiddo?" the man asked as she ran further in, pushing carts out of the way.
"Colby! Are you still up there?"
Heather stopped at the exact opposite shelf from where her basket had been in the next aisle over. With no regard for the world around her or the loaves of bread on the shelves, she began to climb up them like a ladder to reach the top. "Well, if you can't find him, I can go ask the cashiers to call him over the intercom is all."
"Well, do it!"
Heather screamed down from above as she threw a half loaf of Hawaiian at him.
All right!
He ran off to inform the front office. The shelves wobbled uneasily as she peeked over the top. There was no sight of Colby, no sight of anyone. Could there really have been a candy lady? And if so, what was she going to do to him? Across the tops of the other aisles she scanned as her fingers began to slip. She could only barely see over as it was, and the shelf was beginning to lean backward. Just as the last of her balance faded, Heather saw on the other shelf of the opposite aisle a face. A woman was grinning ear to ear, her eyes squinting with delight. There, among the product, the candy lady's head tilted in a stiff, jerking motion. The metal rack gave way, and Heather fell to the floor, crushing several loaves of bread in the process. People gasped and laughed at the spectacle. One older woman casually grabbed the Hawaiian half-loaf off the floor and placed it in her handbasket. With walkie-talkie at the ready, a manager approached. The concerned look she arrived with shifted into an exasperated grimace as she surveyed the mess.
Ma'am, you're looking for your son? His name is Colby?
A few fellow shoppers helped lift the shelf off of Heather, who stood quickly and ran to the aisle where she had seen the candy lady's face.
Ma'am, don't leave. Yes, he's Colby. Call him over the intercom and tell him Mommy's on her way,
Heather shouted back as she raced onward. There were a few shoppers pacing the aisle when she arrived. Running up to each and examining their faces proved fruitless. Colby and the candy lady were nowhere to be found. Lashing out, Heather started pulling food off the shelves in desperation. She sprinted to both ends. Nothing. A hand gripped her shoulder. They took another one, didn't they? Heather slapped away the hand in fright, then turned to see a man in a store uniform. A basket of returned items stood beside him, ready to be restocked. He looked past her to the messy aisle she had left in her wake. You won't find them. They don't walk in our world. They walk between.
Well, what are you saying? Between life and death? Between dimensions?
No. He guided her to an end cap and grabbed one side firmly. With metal screeching on tile, he slid the display aside to reveal a gap between the shelves. Dust particles wafted from the dark place within. Heather stared at the foot-wide tunnel which ran the length of the aisle. The dirt of long decades coated the floor and walls. Old cans and moldy bags sat crumpled and blackened along the path ahead.
My son is in there?
A cold chill gripped Heather's chest. Might still be. I call them watchers, always staring from the highest shelf. I can hear them sometimes while I'm facing product. They giggle at us.
Us?
Their food source. We eat groceries. They eat us.
This is crazy.
Take this. The man handed her a large pocket knife. I use it to stab centipedes when I find them.
Does that happen often?
More often than you'd want. With weapon in hand, Heather turned sideways and squeezed into the gap between the shelves. It was tight at first, but gradually, inexplicably, the space widened until she could face straight on again. Speckles of light shone in through the grated metal walls. Getting up close, she could see the backs of chip bags, even the shoppers walking by. The in-between seemed to go on endlessly, as if this one tunnel connected every aisle in the store. Looking back, the sliver of light where she had begun was gone, replaced by more of the passageway. In the hazy darkness, Heather spotted a figure. It was pressed against the wall. As she drew closer, a bizarre scene came into view. The man, or whatever it was, had a body of average height. Its clothing was elegant, as if it were attending a gala. The most inhuman characteristic was its elongated neck, which stretched upward from its shoulders all the way to the top of the shelf. Unsteadily, it pressed itself against the cold aluminum wall, tapping its fingers in excitement. Heather took several cautious steps forward, not wanting to alert the creature to her presence. Finally, she squeezed by and looked beyond. Ahead, there stood more grotesque figures, obscenely dressed and giggling with delight. One wore a backless cocktail dress. Its stomach was distended and swollen, its protruding mass nearly filling the cramped walkway. A dark realization crept into Heather's mind. She weaved gingerly around the watchers until she reached the bloated woman. Far above was a face she recognized. This was the Candy Lady. It had to be, which meant Heather stared long at her veiny, pulsating belly. Something inside shifted. Unfolding the pocket knife, she gripped her shaking hand to steady it. Then, with firm resolve, stabbed deep into the creature's upper torso. It screamed, twisting and cracking. The Candy Lady's neck spiraled. Upside down, dark hair dangling long, the grinning watcher locked eyes with her attacker. There was no time left. Heather pushed with all her strength and tore downward, causing a burst of scarlet viscera to cascade upon the dirty floor. Hot air wafted from Colby as he lay crumpled there, sticky but still breathing. Heather scooped him in her arms and scurried fast down the in-between. Bobbing and ducking to avoid disgruntled watchers that scratched angrily at the two, she tore past all. No matter how far she ran, however, she could not find the end cap where her descent into madness had begun. Just as her legs grew tired, ahead there came a small crack of light, dwindling even as she approached. The bread aisle. It was the shelf from before, and the employees were standing it back up. Roaring, she burst forth, knocking it down once again with a bang. Confused shoppers and employees alike stared in horror as Heather stepped out of the darkness, blood-soaked and sticky, carrying her unconscious son.
Colby, please make your way to the front of the store. Colby, please make your way to the front of the store.
The intercom echoed over the silent crowd. Heather walked with confidence to the end of the aisle and attempted, clumsily, to hand the knife back to the employee who had shown her the way. "Keep it. Like I said, it happens more often than you'd want." Gripping it tightly while cradling her son in her arms, Heather headed for the exit. As they passed the registers, Colby snuck a candy bar off one of the shelves, then fell asleep once more.